Right. I started out, I was in the classroom just like you guys about 15 years ago. I was a CIS student, and I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my life. And previously, I had thought I wanted to be a geology major. I loved earth sciences, and so I was going down that road, and I actually took a career services class, and I had to go out and I had to mirror some people in the earth sciences field. And the three people that I chose, two of them were out of work, and the other one was traveling extensively. And I decided that wasn't something I wanted to do. And I started working on some computers. I'd always been kind of a geek, and I loved technology, and I loved playing with things and taking things apart. I kind of found my home with IT, and I started working at UNC, and that was in '99, and here it is 16 years later, and to be the CIO, it's kind of a dream come true. So the timing of this presentation was really good because as Gene said, I just gone through a national search for the CIO position, and when you go through something like that, you realize how sort of vulnerable you are and how much everything that you do is sort of exposed. And as I was going through the search, I started getting hit up on LinkedIn, and people were looking at my profile, and people were finding me on Twitter, and all kinds of things were happening, and it really brought to the surface how much social media is persuasive in the whole environment, and how you really can't get away from it, and everything that you do and everything that you post and every picture you post really becomes part of your identity. And it worked out quite well because I got a master's degree in ed technology, and I focused a lot on social media. So I liked social media, and I was able to put some more time to it. But for this presentation, it was really good because, much like you guys, you go out there and you start working with people. You start realizing that everything you do, every conference that you go to, every speaking engagement you have, is really something you need to have on your resume. And people are out there searching for you guys. The LinkedIn is amazing, and I'll talk about it some more about how these recruiters are going out and finding you. But you really have to realize that you have this online presence, and you've got to make sure that you've got everything set up the way that you want, and people don't get the wrong impression, because chances are the first time you talk to a recruiter, they're going to know a whole lot more about you than you'll ever know about them or the company that they work for. And you just have to sort of get over that, but it's a big part of the change that we're seeing. Just talk about a little bit about just some social media trends, just sort of just out of interest, and just kind of to get the ball rolling. And we do have some expertise in here too, with Denny and Renee too from the career services. So if we do have some good discussions, I think we've got some additional resources too. Okay, so we'll talk about trends, talk about managing your identity, using social media to find a job. There's a couple different things that you can do. Employers and how they're using social media. Some misconceptions, some things that I think we all sort of think that, we understand the use policy of, say, Facebook or Twitter, and the reality of how they use your data, and how you might feel like you've been taken advantage of. So here's kind of out of Forbes, this came out this year. These are just sort of some of the interesting things. Some of them for this presentation. Investment in social media will become a necessity, not a luxury. You guys are probably aware of that now. If you're looking for a job, if you're doing some things, they're almost always going to ask you if you have a LinkedIn account. So I would absolutely agree with that. Google Plus, it's not really relevant for this conversation, but it's kind of a fun technology if you haven't tried it out. It's something that you're going to see really take off. It's going to be kind of like the yellow pages on the internet for companies, and I think it's probably important to understand that technology. Image-centric networks, so being able to build an identity, that's kind of what it seems like where the direction things are going. That makes a lot of sense. Rise in micro video, you're going to see that in social media, so a lot of short videos, you're probably seeing that now, even on Twitter or Instagram, having a small amount of video that they'll show you now, or on Facebook. You're going to see a lot more of those micro videos, and there's going to be a lot more advertisements in that same sort of space. Foursquare, this isn't really relevant either, but it's going to start to kind of go down. MySpace seems to be picking up some traction again. I don't know if you guys ever used MySpace, but I guess I was kind of in this phase where I just missed that one, unfortunately, and I was happy with Facebook, so we'll roll with that. And then LinkedIn is becoming a major player for business-to-business growth. So we'll talk about that a little bit more. Twitter is continuing to grow pretty quickly, and these things, you can find infographics on what's going on in social media, and it's hard to sort of sift through what's going on, but I think the one thing that I found real common is that Twitter is continuing to pick up a lot of steam. Google Plus is picking up steam, and Facebook is still growing. just not quite as much as the others. If you are interested in this and you want to look at some things that are going on overseas, there's some really interesting places like Brazil and China and India where some of these technologies are really booming and it's seeing huge growth. Okay. Some other things, obviously you guys, I think you're pretty familiar with, Facebook. They're trying to figure out how to monetize this service that they have, so they're trying to figure out how to make money with it. And they're doing it in all kinds of ways. They're making suggestions to you when you're on Facebook and telling you businesses that you might be interested in. And so they're really trying to do that, and that's increasing their revenue. They're doing more and more with mobile ads. They've got 1 billion users out there. It's incredible. So they'll continue to try to figure out how to get products in front of you. That's what marketing's for, and this is certainly a great tool to do that. Just some other interesting things, in Twitter, the 55 to 64-year-old age group was one that was really growing, right? I found that really interesting, and I just talked to the Rotary Club, and I was talking to them, and that they happened to fall into some of that demographic, and it was interesting to see that because I kind of see Twitter as being more of a younger audience, but it was interesting to see that was one of the fastest growing groups as well. So, and then instead of internet users, 21%. Had some exposure. We're using Twitter at least once a month. It's pretty interesting too. That's quite a bit of touch to have. So social media is interesting from a company's perspective. It takes a lot of time, and to be able to manage all the social media tools, you have to have a lot of time. So it's easy to say I want to communicate with all my users, but the amount of time that you need to put into it, it's a lot. It's not something that you can just make part of somebody's job. A lot of times. People are having to have somebody have that role, to manage social media. One of the things that I like to do, and if we have time afterwards, I'll show you some of the social media that I've done, is I like to separate my worlds. And maybe that's just sort of my analytical background and just the way I like to do things, but this seems to be fairly successful with people who are trying to build their identity online as well. So for me personally, for Facebook, I use it for personal. I use it to connect with kind of extended family, close friends, posting pictures of my kids, doing that sort of thing. Of course, I try to keep privacy in mind, but I don't post a lot of things out there that have to do with work or my hobbies. It's mostly just kind of family things. I guess hobbies, I probably do post some things. But there is a way to use Facebook in a more professional way, and so we'll talk about that a little bit too, but I think the point I'm trying to make here with this slide is I think it is important to sort of differentiate how you're using each of your social media. So if you really like to use Twitter and you're on there and you are communicating with a lot of your friends, and then you make a bunch of political statements, and then you're looking for a job, and then you're making jokes about NFL players or whatever you're doing, if you're really mixing it up a lot, it's going to be really hard to figure out who you are, and you may inadvertently give the perception that you feel a certain way about something, and maybe truly you don't, and maybe that's something on LinkedIn you might have a hard time undoing. So LinkedIn, obviously, is a professional resume. It's a place to keep all of your professional information. I think what's important, where you guys are sitting and how you can use it is you need to start using it as a catalog for all the stuff that you're working on. I mean, it could be your senior project or capstone class. Put that information out there and build your whole profile in LinkedIn. Everything that you do. The depth at which you can get in LinkedIn will really help when somebody starts to try to figure out who you are. They can figure out how outgoing you are and how much you like to get involved in things. And if you can, potentially put a little spin in there and show some of your personality too. It shouldn't just be a one-page resume. You should have, you should link to appropriate people that are in your field, maybe classmates, and you guys have a great opportunity right now. And that if you guys start using LinkedIn and you connect, and all of you guys go out and you find jobs, and then you decide you want to move to Boston, and then you look on LinkedIn and you see, hey, I've got 6 people that were in my capstone class that live in Boston. I wonder if any of them are in the marketing field. This is all networking. That's what LinkedIn is all about, and that's what you got to really start doing. And the sooner you do it, it sort of continues to grow on top of itself, and it'll go on and on. I thought it was really interesting, the parallels of going to the Rotary Club, because largely the Rotary Club was about networking. And it had been that way forever, right? And it was a networking tool, and this is kind of the new version of that. It's a way to connect, and it has so many more capabilities and can reach so much further. And then Twitter, this is sort of my opinion, but I think it's a good place for hobbies, opinions. It's something where you need to be kind of high velocity, where you're tweeting a lot, or maybe if you just want to be a passive Twitter user, you're just reading feeds. There is good information out of there. Most of the time it links to other articles that you might be interested in. But it takes a bit of time, and it takes a little while to understand how Twitter works, and if you're going to tweet back to somebody, or if you like to do hashtags, or however you use it, there's a certain competency you have to get in order to be a good Twitter user. Nothing that you guys couldn't do, but I think Twitter is kind of a good place to express your opinions about things. I like to, maybe put some jokes. I'm a runner, so I have quite a few followers, but they're all runners. So it's only interesting if you're a runner. So I don't post much about work or much about personal life on Twitter, but I post all kinds of silly things about running. And believe it or not, there's all kinds of stupid stuff you can talk about when you talk about running. So if you do happen to follow me, that's what you'll hear about is I went for a run in the mountains and I saw a squirrel or whatever. But there are some ways that you can use Twitter to do some job hunting. I guess the first thing is the company that you're working with, do they use Twitter? Are they using it as a mechanism to find people out in the work field? And sometimes it's kind of hard to tell. It may be that people within the company are using Twitter, so there may be a reason to connect to some people just to see some of the information that they're sharing, and maybe if you do happen to work with their HR department, or you are working with somebody within the company, maybe you just have kind of the inside track on something that they're working on. So I think there's some value in figuring out if there are people within the company. Pick strategic people to follow. So if you go out on Twitter and you meet somebody today and you say, okay, I'm going to go follow them because I want to hear about the things that they say. Make sure that you're picking people that are appropriate in your field. The suggestions that Twitter will give you are kind of based on the people you're already following. So if you're following a lot of people, let's say you're really interested in becoming a CFO someday, and you're following all these big CFOs of all these different companies, it'll continue to suggest other ones that you might be interested in, kind of based on the kinds of things that they're posting. So if you build that kind of strategic group that you follow, it'll kind of build on itself. And then with Twitter, you got to kind of build your brand. So do you like to make jokes about things? How are you using it? And think about if your potential employer looks at your Twitter account, what is that going to say about you? Is it going to make them think that you are anti-government? Is it, what could it be? Or if you post on Twitter that, the only time you get your mobile device out is when you're at the bar, and you like to, tweet every time you have a new craft beer, it's up to you. Is that an impression that you feel comfortable giving, say the HR director that might be looking at you for a job? Other thing, as you get into Twitter, and I don't know how familiar you guys are with Twitter, but with the hashtags, there's a lot of things you can look for. So specific to your field, if you were, IT, maybe the SEO, there's hashtag sales jobs, web design, and of course, I'm kind of thinking of IT ones, consulting, accounting, hashtag legal. There's all kinds of things. If you go out there and you do some searches on Google, you can find some of these hashtags, or if you're just kind of digging around with the companies that you're interested in, you might see a hashtag that they use, and you can follow that, and I can show you how to do that as well if we have some time. But those are some of the things that you can do with Twitter. I think it's probably a really effective way to understand where a company is, what kind of information they're trying to communicate. I haven't personally seen a lot of job offers, flying around in Twitter, but I think you do see things like we're looking to hire this type of position, and here's where you need to go. So something to take a look at. Facebook for job hunting. So this one took me a little more work. I actually wasn't sure if there was an effective way to do this, but there is, and I think it's really because Facebook is sort of evolving, and they're trying to figure out how to advertise, and also businesses are trying to build their identity on Facebook. So this is a lot of what Google Plus was trying to do. So for those of you who use Google Plus, it's kind of like Facebook is catching up with Google Plus in that they're trying to, the businesses are trying to have their own identity. So in the same respect, liking companies that you're interested in. So they may very well post things on Facebook. Even in Twitter, a lot of times they'll post you back to their Facebook site. So I have seen a lot of companies have a link to their HR or their job postings through Facebook. In the About section, there's a place for professional skills. So you can put all of your degrees and all of the things that you're working on in there. So that will certainly help. Again, this is assuming that you want to use Facebook for job hunting. So if you want to keep a pretty private life, maybe posting all the things that you're interested in on Facebook and that being public, it's kind of a toss-up, right? Because we'll talk about sort of securing your Facebook environment, and if you do that in such a way, if somebody's trying to find you for a job hunting situation, they're not going to find you. So that's kind of the balance there. And then in Facebook, posting appropriate information. I think that kind of goes without saying, but I can't help but remind you, it's fun to post pictures and have fun and do those sorts of things. But once those pictures get posted, maybe it's you doing something silly or whatever it is, they're out there forever, and they're never going away. There's companies that are built around trying to clean up people's images, and you have an opportunity, I guess, right now where you're at to avoid getting in that situation. So just think about that. It's up to you, but I know a few people in their hiring, they'll go out and sort of Facebook stalk somebody to see what kinds of things they're posting and what's going on in their life. So it's not ridiculous to think that somebody's going to look at your Facebook profile. And again, if you want to do some things and you don't want to share that, there's ways to lock Facebook down, at least to some degree. So I won't beat that one anymore, but I think you guys have probably heard that before. Okay, so let's talk about LinkedIn. So this is kind of the teeth of what we're going to talk about. It's launched in 2003, roughly 4,500 users. Okay, and now we're looking at 313 million users. So obviously it's grown a lot. 200 countries. Fastest demographic growing right now is students and recent grads. So if you're not on there already, everybody else is doing it, so you better too, right? And then 67% of LinkedIn members are located outside of the U.S. states. So a lot of people traveling are using LinkedIn as well. This is pretty small. I don't know if you can read these, but I just kind of want to give you an idea of some of the other places where LinkedIn. So we have 100 million over here in the United States. Mexico, 6 million. Brazil. Again, Brazil is really one of those strange places, and I haven't had time to spend to figure it out, but it's on social media. It's one of those places that is really booming. I don't know if you have anything to speak to that, but it is kind of interesting that one keeps popping up. The UK, of course, and Australia, and then India, 27 million. So definitely a worldwide company. So I think it's important for you to understand how people are going to start using LinkedIn to find you. And I have a small video that I'm going to show, but their revenue model. So if you ever wonder, well, why is LinkedIn there, and who's benefiting from it? It seems like, certainly they're advertising, they're doing things. Really, where they're making their money is these companies that are trying to find you guys. So on average, they're charging about $8,000 or $9,000 for a recruiting service where they can come out and try to find you, and they can filter down their results, and they can look for all these keywords, and it's very sophisticated. And that's where they're making their money. So you see on this graph, this talent solutions, that's what they're talking about. They're providing solutions to bring people in, consulting services, all the things that they can do. They have business services that they sell as well. That's where they're making their money. I don't know, for those of you who use LinkedIn, it'll prompt you probably every couple weeks to buy a premium subscription. That's a small portion of their revenue. I mean, they're making money off of it, obviously, but they're really making their money off the companies and helping them find you guys. So, and we kind of switched up here, so I'm hoping this will work. If not, we'll be all right. This is the recruiting tool that they use for LinkedIn, and let me make sure.
80% of today's working professionals aren't actively looking for a new job, but one of them may be just the candidate you're looking to hire. With LinkedIn Recruiter, unlock the full power of the world's largest professional network to find, manage, and engage the best classic talent. Expand your search to the entire network of over 300 million professionals. Then quickly refine it by using up to 25 search filters, including industry, location, and current company, to zero in on ideal candidates with precision. With Recruiter, gain exclusive access to full member profiles, view full names, work experience, and educational background. Use LinkedIn email to engage and build relationships. Send one-to-one or one-to-many emails. And you can use custom templates to save time. Most importantly, since email comes from a trusted source, you'll get far higher response rates than regular emails or cold calls. Build a pipeline of talent for today's openings and tomorrow's. Tire prospects by key skills and attributes. Add a status. And take notes for your entire recruiting team to see. Then organise prospects and collaborate with colleagues in shared project folders. Let LinkedIn continue the sourcing for you. Recruiters' matching algorithm suggests relevant candidates based on your activity. And with saved searches, Recruiter monitors new matches to past search criteria and sends the new profiles right to your homepage and inbox. Finally, use robust analytics and reporting tools to track your progress and share valuable data and insights with hiring managers. Gain exclusive access to the world's largest professional network with LinkedIn Recruiter. Learn more at talent.linkedin.com.
Okay, pretty interesting, right? It's it kind of makes you want to go back out and look at your LinkedIn profile to think about how these companies are looking for you. This was, we use LinkedIn to post a lot of positions, but we have to use this recruiter tool. Unfortunately, I don't think we're looking for the number of people that some of these other companies are. But this is pretty interesting to see that they have these kinds of analytics just on something that you're posting, with your online presence in LinkedIn. So, you take this and then you look at recruiting companies who are using all of the tools that they have. So they're using LinkedIn and they're using, somebody who's looking at Facebook and looking at Twitter and they're finding out all these things about you. It's kind of scary almost that they have that much access to who you are and what you've done. But I think what's important is when you look at this and you think about the things that you're tagging. So in LinkedIn, you have the opportunity to say, these are the skills that I have. And when you do that, those are the kinds of things the analytic tool is using in order to pick you out and maybe bring you in as a potential candidate. I think it's also important when they first started out on this one is that not everybody that's using LinkedIn is looking for a job. I think that's really important because I think sort of the perception a lot of times is if you see one of your employees using LinkedIn, they must be looking for a job. I think the reality is hopefully they're using LinkedIn to keep track of the things that they're doing. It's a very organized way to do that, and certainly it does help them if they do go look for a job. But it said I think a small portion really were actually actively searching for a job. So I guess for you guys, even though you may not be ready to look for a job or maybe you don't know what you want to do yet, it's still a good place to start kind of cataloging all the things that you're working on. And perhaps by doing that, you'll sort of see a trend of the things that you're gravitating towards as well. Okay. So this is, we're talking about it in terms of LinkedIn, but this is, of course, important for everything that you're doing. You always need to try to differentiate yourself. What are you good at? What kind of skills do you have that maybe the other candidates don't have? What kind of projects have you worked on? That one comes up a lot. I do a lot of project management, and so a lot of the people I work with and hire are involved in projects. So I want to know what kind of projects you've worked on. I know you say you have a background in this particular technology, but have you actually implemented it? Have you rolled it out in a higher education situation? Have you, what's the scope of it? Was it a big project? Did you impact, 10 users, or did you impact 10,000 users? I really like to know a lot about the projects that you've worked on. What do you feel are your accomplishments? Did you rise through the company very quickly? Did you work in accounting before you came over to IT? What kinds of things have you done? What kind of completes your personal profile? What are you proud of? So what are your accomplishments? And I think sometimes the things that people highlight are kind of interesting too. And that's, I get a good feel of who you are by the things that you decided to highlight as your accomplishments. Okay, recommendations. So there's no better time to start getting good at asking for recommendations. LinkedIn makes it really easy. You can ask somebody to send you a recommendation, and I've done this for several employees. It could be a paragraph, it could be a page, but go ahead and start doing that now. Maybe you've made a special connection with one of your professors here in the business school, and you decide that I want someone, if they want to know a little bit more about me, maybe it's okay if they call Dr. McCorkle and ask him, how I put together this marketing presentation. Those kinds of things are really good, and go ahead and get over the anxiety of doing that now, because you're going to need it. Whether you go to grad school, you're going to need recommendation letters, so you're going to need to start making those connections with people. It could be friends that you've worked with, it could be colleagues, whatever it may be, but go ahead and start getting good at that, and LinkedIn's a great place, I think, to start. Certification, so one, I think for the IT field, and that's where my background largely is, certifications are really important. And LinkedIn's a great place to showcase those. But I think what you'll see is, the more of those things you can put in your LinkedIn profile, when they do those searches and they're trying to find people. I recently had gotten my Six Sigma certification, so it's largely kind of a manufacturing project management background. And I put that on LinkedIn, and I think probably 5 days later I got contacted by 2 companies that were looking for somebody who was what they call a black belt, Six Sigma. And I mean, that happened literally, like within a week I was getting contacts just for putting that certification out there. So those kinds of things are going to get you at least a few more looks. And I know in the IT field at least, there's all kinds of certifications, whether Microsoft or Oracle or whatever. But certainly in all of the fields, there's things that you can get certified on. And it doesn't have to be an official certification. Some of them are relatively light, and maybe a conference that you went to, and now you are, I went to a project management facilitation course, and I guess they sort of lightly certify you. But I think putting that on LinkedIn at least let people know that was a skill set that I could bring to the table. Okay. And then I think it's important to sort of bridge, some sort of personal thing that you have that maybe is interesting. So I told you that I was a runner, right? And for a lot of times, that's helped me out in my career, because there's a lot of people that are runners. And it turns out our HR director is a runner. That was helpful. And there's lots of professors at UNC that are runners, so it's always kind of helped to have some of that networking. But what I didn't realize is when I went to do this behavioral interview, I had started out with a conversation because I had a marathon coming up, and he had asked me some question, and somehow I said something about running, and then he started asking me, well, he had a great background, and his son-in-law was a runner, and next thing you know, half an hour into our discussion, I had revealed a bunch of information about myself, and I was thinking it was just kind of personal, it was interesting, I like to run or whatever, but it ended up sort of making a connection with him at the interview table. And also, he had this perception, which I would agree with, that runners are good employees. And so, it worked out really well. And so I think that was sort of eye-opening for me, too, to realize, as much as I like running and I've made a lot of good connections with people, it also kind of made me who I am. I'm a goal-oriented person, so running's a great sport for me. I like to pick a time that I'm going to try to run a race in, and I like to have a goal, 3 months out, I've got this race I'm going to do, and that does sort of make me who I am. And so I think it's important to bring some of those personal things to light. I have a good friend of mine who's a web developer, and he's also a comedian. And that comes in really handy, right? And I've actually had him do some work here for the ethics department, and his sense of humor absolutely comes in handy. And so, in an interview scenario where he could bring that, I think he probably couldn't help but, try to make the person he's interviewing him laugh. That's just part of his personality. But I just think it's important to cultivate those things, and don't just be, a paper tiger. Don't just have all these things on there. I think you need to have some sort of personal flair. I don't want to miss that one. One other thing, continue to educate yourself. I know that goes without saying, right? We all know we got to continue to educate ourselves, and we talked about certifications, but when I got this job a couple months ago, I was still taking I was taking the black belt Six Sigma class, and one of my employees said, well, you don't need to do that anymore, you got the job you wanted. I thought, well, that's, that may be, but the fact of the matter is, had I not educated myself the entire time I was working, I would have never gotten this job in the first place. And I don't necessarily know what's going to happen a year from now or 5 years from now, but I'll continue to educate myself. And had I really not taken that approach, I finished with my undergrad in 2001. I worked at UNC for 15 years, but the whole time I worked here, I worked on my master's degree, I worked on certifications, I went back and got Six Sigma. So even if you get a job that you really like and you think, I nailed it, I got the thing that I want and I'm done, you've got to keep pushing, you got to keep educating yourself, you got to find more things that you're interested in, And I think, again, and then catalog that with LinkedIn so that people know what you're working on. It's really important. I can't tell you how much that will help you when you get in the field. Okay, some things maybe not to do in LinkedIn. And these are a couple, and if you go out and search, you can find many, many more, but these are some things that I've personally seen do. I actually got these from an Inc.com article, but in LinkedIn you can connect with people. If you just connect with me, but I don't even know who you are, well, chances are I won't connect back to you. But don't just connect to people just to connect to them. Give them some sort of information. I'm a student at UNC, and I'm really interested in the things you're working on. Something short like that would be sufficient, but make some sort of connection so people don't think you're just blasting them. I get requests in LinkedIn all the time from people, and a lot of times they're vendors trying to maybe get to know me before they try to cold call me and try to sell me software. And so a lot of times when people connect to me and I don't know why, I just assume they're a vendor, and so therefore I don't link to them. You connect to me and then you immediately ask for something. You immediately want a letter of reference. You want, some of these things. It's a lot like a friendship or a relationship at work. You kind of got to get to know me. I got to see the things that you're posting and that you're interested in. So just hopping on there and just being like, okay, now I need this and I need all these things. I think that's something you want to stay away from. Asking people to provide you recommendations even though they don't work with you or they've only worked with you a little bit. I think that's a really awkward position to put people in, so I would avoid doing that. So maybe you've talked to the controller once at your business, and then the next thing you know, you're like, well, I'm applying for an accounting job, and it'd be really nice to have a controller give me a reference, but it may not be appropriate for you to ask for a reference from them if you really don't know them that well. Okay. And then in LinkedIn, they have this ability to endorse people to say that they're really good at certain skill sets, and usually you'll list all the things, like maybe I say database administration, web development, or whatever. I have all these things I list, and then Chris gets on there to see what I'm up to, and he says, oh yeah, you really are good at that, and you really are good at that, and we go back and forth. That's okay, that's healthy, we've worked together. But if you're just doing that because you're just trying to build a relationship with me, so you're like, oh yeah, you're good at that, and you have no idea, then I see you as kind of not being genuine. So that's something to stay away from. Okay, so let's talk about sort of misconceptions and sort of how some of these social medias work. So reading user policies is no fun. Anytime you've installed software, the user thing comes up, and you don't even take a look at it, right? You just click through. We call them click-throughs. I think that if you're going to use social media, you absolutely need to read the user policies. So if you go into Facebook's, they've actually spent a lot of time putting it in language that I think that we'll all understand. When I look at a software agreement now and I see all the legalese that they put in there, I do have to kind of decide that I'm going to sit down and read through that and really understand the terms and conditions. The user policies for social media, they have made them so that all of us can read them and understand what they mean. And I had it on my laptop, but I'll pull it up real quick. If you take a look at the Facebook one, they have stuff really explicitly laid out about how they're going to use your information. One of the things I want to talk about is sort of the misconception. So you guys had heard everybody was really upset about all the information that was sort of being used to understand, I guess, Facebook users. And they had posted that they knew when people were going to break up, was one of the funny things I think that came out. Based on the things that people were posting, they knew that their relationships were about to end. And that was interesting, right? And they have all kinds of other things that they'll come up with these correlations. If you read that user policy, what it says is that they're going to use your information. They're not going to use your personal identity, so they're not going to say, this is Chris's profile and this is what Chris likes to do. But they're going to go, there are a lot of Chris's out there, people like Chris, who at 9 o'clock check their Facebook and like a lot of pictures of their friends doing stupid things, right? So they look at all those, and that's the kind of information that they're gathering, and that's what they're saying is their business model is built around. They want to gather up all that information for people, and they want to advertise, and they want to know all of your personal habits, right? They want to know, do you get up in the morning and get on Facebook, or do you post pictures when it rains? Whatever. They're trying to pull together all this information so that they can hit you at the right time and advertise to you. So I think the misconception that I wanted to talk about is that you think that they're not using your information. They're not using your personal information, right? But they're using you as a person and the things that you do, and they're putting that all together, and then they're going to advertise to you, oh, I better, give them an ad for Red Bull because it's Thursday morning and we all know everybody went out on Wednesday night, or whatever it is. They're really pulling that stuff together, and it can be really invasive, right? I mean, they can know what you want before you know it. They can go, man, I bet they're hungry, and we'll put up an ad for McDonald's or whatever. They're getting to the point where they're using that information to really guess what you're going to do next. And I think sometimes that feels like a little bit like the big brother, or that they know too much, right? But they're trying to do it to make your user experience a little bit better. That's really what they're trying to do. They want you to have this experience, and if you don't share that information, if for some reason you were able to use these social medias and not give any of that information, it wouldn't really work. The things that they're trying to do really wouldn't get off the ground. It'd basically be like an old school listserv where you just throw information into the sky and maybe somebody would reply back to it. So they need that information to kind of understand, who do you need to listen to when the Facebook thread comes through, and they base that on things that you maybe have liked. So I think that's something that you need to understand. It's easy to say, well, I don't want to share anything with them. Well, if you read the user policy, you're going to share everything with them. They're going to look at everything you do, everything that you like. And it's pretty hard to get rid of that stuff, just like I said before. So some of the things you can do is obviously share information with just your friends or just your family. You can make it public, or you can customize it. That certainly helps, right? But that's just sharing your information. That's just sharing the post that you just made. It's not saying that you're only sharing the things that you're doing with your friends. Because if you set everything to private or to friends, and let's say that you decide you have a circle of friends of 10 people, and that's the only people you're going to share with, that's just those posts and the pictures that you have. But everything you do, the time that you logged in, the picture that you liked, the profile that you looked at, all those things, they're still capturing it. So don't think that just because you've made it private that you're not giving your information to Facebook still. Okay? And the same thing goes with Twitter and LinkedIn as well. They're pulling all this information. I mean, you just saw what they're doing with LinkedIn, right? So they're really picking up on those behaviors of the things that you do. I mean, some of the other things that are interesting too is they have, on LinkedIn, did you notice that they're not using an email client? They're not saying, just put your email in and we're going to send an email to you. They want you to use that LinkedIn email because they know that there's a better chance that you're going to open that up. I know my mailbox, I get about 200 emails a day, and when vendors, and they're mostly vendors trying to contact me, I just delete them and I move on, right? And so it's important that they do that. So there's a central place that you're just looking for people who are trying to communicate with you for business, and that's why they do that. Okay. So I have time for questions. We got probably about 15 minutes, and I also can show you around a little bit in some social media, and I'll show you my profile in LinkedIn. I put quite a few things in there as I was looking for a job, obviously, and trying to get the CIO position. I had to put that together, show you some of the things that I shared. So just so if you don't mind, how many of you guys are using LinkedIn right now? Can you raise your hand? Yeah? Pretty good, pretty good. Obviously Facebook, I'm guessing everybody. Yeah, maybe not. We're kind of at that weird stage where people are starting to think that maybe they don't want to do Facebook. Maybe you'll end up on MySpace. How many of you are using MySpace, just out of curiosity? Yeah, that's what I would expect. It's funny, it's funny. If I were to go into the PVA department, I bet you it would be different because of bands and music and stuff. It's much different, but yeah.
I just want to give a quick plug that Career Services on October 15th for our job and internship fair. Thanks to Disney's suggestion is we have a professional photographer coming to our job and internship fair to do headshots for you while you're already dressed up for the job and internship fair to have your LinkedIn headshot.
That's a great idea. I was lucky enough that we had decided we were going to post some of our pictures for some things through work, and so I was able to get a professional headshot, if you will. Okay. So again, having all of your information on LinkedIn and trying to compile as much of it as you can. Let's see, let think I'll be able to scroll, stay back here. I obviously have my background and some of the things that I've done, my experience in the positions that I've had. As I said, adjunct faculty, I'm putting all that information out there because it helps sort of tell the story about who I am. Okay? I even decided after that interview that I was going to make a plug for the Runner's Roost team that I'm on, thinking that, who knows, maybe someday that'll come in handy too. Certifications. I went into projects, so when you go in there and you add a project into LinkedIn, you can also link people that you've worked with. So we had a huge ERP implementation in 2006 here at UNC. Ryan Rhodes and Dan Packer were two of my biggest helpers in that project. So it's important. So I made that link, and I'm not sure. I think that shows up on their profile as well. Okay. So I think I think the project information is really important. I may have a bias because I like projects and I'm a project manager, but I think it really tells a little bit more depth about the thing it is that the skill set that you have. So again, just a couple of different projects. And then top skills, so I suggested the majority of these, and then people, for one reason or another, whether they'd worked with me or maybe you were a student of mine, would say, yeah, I agree, he does have that skill set, so it's kind of funny if you kind of get a vote for what people think you're good at, and also they can make suggestions as well. But that's a good way to also sort of brand yourself and make those connections. So I've got some friends who are in far more technical positions, and their makeup for their skill set is very different for things. Maybe they do Ruby on Rails or whatever it is, and I'm looking for somebody like that. This is a really good place to sort of verify that not only you say you have that skill set, but 20 of your friends or colleagues sort of vouch for you that you have that skill set. So. Of course, your education, so my master's and my bachelor's degree, and then interests. So I have a couple of the things that I like that I put on there too. Another thing that you might want to start thinking about is organizations that you're watching. So for me, the Rocky Mountain Project Management Institute is one of the places that I like. They have a lot of good project management folks. I'm actually started up Northern Colorado Database Professionals Group, so if there are any DBAs, and I see one out there that I know of, plug for them. We have a monthly meeting where we get all the database administrators together in Northern Colorado. And so trying to make some of those connections will one, on your feed in LinkedIn, will provide you some articles that are maybe more relevant to the stuff that you're interested in, but it's also another indication of the kinds of things that you're interested in. So let's see if there's anything else. These are, I have the, recommendations that I've written for some folks. Okay. And then you could, if you wanted to, you could look at connections with people that I have as well. So these are some groups that I follow. There's the Montfort College. Okay. So, and the alumni organizations as you guys graduate, again, just another networking tool to keep in touch with people, and doing that through LinkedIn is great. See here, like I said, PMI, the Project Management Institute, okay, and some things that I follow as well, some schools and some businesses, since I'm not really looking for a job right now. I don't have a lot of those things, but if I were, you might see that I was looking, like for me, it would be a good example that I was maybe following a lot of higher education institutions, because that's what I was interested in. If you were into healthcare or whatever it may be, you might put more information, and then when I'm looking at your profile, I'll go, okay, he wants to work in this field. So like I said, I've kind of put each of those categories together and put all that information in. And I was noticing this the other day. My profile strength is an all-star, whatever that means. It really just means that I've kind of filled out every one of those pieces of information. So again, just start working on this now. It's a great time. Again, looking for recommendations, looking for even just crafting the way that you describe yourself. As you get older and as time passes and as experiences sort of build up, you may want to present yourself differently. So don't just be satisfied with the thing that you posted out there. I think it's good to read it once in a while, and it seems like every time I read mine, I find even like a punctuation problem. So it may not hurt just to do that just for that reason alone, but I think it's important to read through that and make sure that you're communicating who you are, and even if you're slowly changing or you're getting into a different field, maybe you can make that show up here too. Let's see here. I usually use a product called TweetDeck, And I was going to show you that on my laptop, but I'll have to just pull up Twitter. So I said I have a bunch of followers, and they're all runners. So seriously, if you're going to follow this to see what I do at work, you're gonna see that I run at lunch. Is probably what you'll figure out if you follow me on Twitter. But if you're a runner and you want to know what race I'm going to run, or see me maybe retweet some interesting thing about a marathon or something like that. But I guess I wanted to show this just to show you, differentiating those social medias for different reasons, right? So who I follow may be interesting, from a business standpoint, but the tweets that I would have are largely, I was at a conference, and I posted this yesterday. What's a run without a bat cave? So I went on a trail run and I found a bat cave, right? It's not really all that interesting, but that's what Twitter's about. It's nothing interesting. On Twitter, it's really just a bunch of random things. So keep that in mind. I think that's really important. It's good to have those hobbies and be able to voice your opinions, and but is that something you want your prospective employee to see? Let's see here. So we've got about 10 minutes, so let's, I'm sure there's some questions out there, maybe. It's been pretty quiet. Yeah?
You choose to keep your Facebook more personal.
Yep.
And somebody can work as you on Facebook. How do you go about handling that if you're not really?
That's a great question. I'm glad you asked that, and there's not one answer to that. My personal opinion for Facebook is that I try to not have a lot of connections with people I work with, not because I'm hiding something, but just because it just adds another dimension of things that happen at work. If they know that something had happened, I don't know. I like to try to keep them separated, but there's been a lot of talk about what's appropriate, and there's been some people that have actually had a lot of trouble where their boss would want them to friend them on Facebook, and they say, no, I don't want to do that. I want to keep some separation. It's totally appropriate in a professional setting to say, I want that separation. And you don't have, unless they stand over your shoulder and make you, be friends with them, they could certainly watch watch what's happening in your profile unless you have it locked down. So there's always that. But my personal opinion is, I think you really should separate that. I always sort of struggled with that as I taught too, as I would have students who would ask me to be friends on Facebook. I would usually wait till after class was over, or on LinkedIn. I would wait maybe until I'd finished that class with that individual. But I would say, professionally speaking, you don't have to, and I wouldn't advise it unless, I've got some people. Chris is a good example. I've worked with him for almost 20 years, and we went to college at the same time. We have a relationship outside of work, so it's appropriate for us to basically see each other's kids growing up. Is largely what we see. So so does that answer your question? It's interesting though. It's a really good topic, and one you could probably spend an entire session on, really, because there's a lot that goes on there. There's a lot of things, having your employer know that maybe you were sick on Friday, but maybe you went skiing, right? So you got to keep those things in mind. Yep. Anybody else? Grant?
Yeah. As of late, I've been reading a lot of controversies. It's kind of, I don't know if the trend has grown or it's decreased. Basically, when you're trying to get a job, a potential employer might ask you to crack open your Facebook. It's actually ask your password. What do you think of that?
I've read that too. I think that's the point I would make about that is when you apply for jobs and you look for your dream job, it better be a company that you want to work for and that you feel good about the ethics of that company and the way that they do things. So if you post a lot of pictures and you do, high risk sports or whatever, and you're applying for a company who maybe doesn't see value in that, and that's going to be a negative thing, then maybe you don't want to work for that company. If I went to an interview and they said, open your Facebook up, I want to look at it, I'd say, I don't want to work here. But that's my opinion. But that's not to say, if you work in the communications industry and you're doing a lot of marketing, your personality is out there a lot further. If you're a radio personality or you're a TV personality or something like that, it's a different world. It really is. I can't speak to that wholly, but a lot of the things you do in your personal interactions are a lot more public. Or a high-ranking official, politicians, I don't know, they have Facebook sites, but it's not them posting pictures of their poodle jumping over the fence or whatever, right? It's a lot more of a tactical thing, to use it to sort of get information out of there. So, frankly, I would say, if you get in a situation like that, it may very well be a company you don't want to work for, at least if you have strong objections to that. Now, maybe in the field you're in, and you're like, yeah, I want to show you all the cool places I went skiing, and you're trying to get on with Rosengill, maybe you do want to show them your Facebook site. Maybe they want to see how much outdoor activity you do, and you go, yeah, check out my Facebook. I just climbed Mount Evans last weekend, or whatever. So I guess it just sort of depends. But yeah, that seems like a pretty harsh practice, certainly. Yeah. What else? Guess I'd have more questions, right? Sure.
How is it legal to check your Facebook? Like, you don't want to apply for a job and you future boss. Is it illegal to check my
Yeah.
Facebook? Yes.
If you go on to, you mean if you're a potential employee and you apply for a job and for me to go look, yeah, absolutely, it's public. I mean, the newspaper could also publish something that you posted on Facebook. It's completely public. Yeah, and that's another thing to think about. We talked about the privacy policy. There are situations, they'll secure your information. They won't allow your personal sort of demographic information to just be let free. Like Facebook isn't just going to post that Bret's 36 years old and lives in Greeley, right? But they could get subpoenaed. There could be a situation where they have to give that information up, so they will not hold it, under certain circumstances. But I think the other important point is, if you post something, know that it's going to be there forever. In fact, the Twitter user policy is really interesting. If you go take a look at it, it says you are what you tweet. That's what one of the lines is in there, basically saying, if this is damaging your reputation or you get in trouble for something that you post, they don't care. It's public. You always have to think about that. I mean, the same thing goes with your email at work. For those of you at work, I mean, that's a resource that your work is providing you, and whatever you do on there, it's really it's theirs. So your email could be looked at too in a lot of cases. Any other questions? That'd be a good place to wrap up. Well, thank you guys. I appreciate it.